So not long ago, Brian Keating made it publicly known that he's invited Stephen Wolfram and Eric Weinstein to UCSD in order to collaborate with them in making tests and predictions of their respective theories of everything. Brian even also went on Lex Fridman's podcast and said that he wants to reenact the kind of environment that was created by the famous post-war conference, the Shelter Island Conference of 1947, which brought together the greatest minds in physics at the time, both experimental and theoretical, in order for him and Eric to get more feedback on geometric unity. There's been some controversy about that, which I'll get back to in a moment, but I thought I'd actually get some maybe technical clarification from you first. How do you, in your mind, do you think an astrophysicist might go about testing a theory of everything? I'm not an astrophysicist, so I just want to get kind of an idea of what kind of toolkit that someone like a Brian Keating might have if they wanted to go about testing, say, geometric unity.
The big problem with most theories that purport to be theories of everything, I would say, is that they are not theories that lend themselves to concrete predictions about the physical universe that we live in, right? That's the hard part. The hard part of taking any theory of everything is, there's a theoretical aspect of it where you say, okay, here's my super unified theory, right? My super unified theory of everything. Everything's in here, right? Generally, theory of everything say we're going to take the four fundamental forces: the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and gravity, and we're going to unify them together into one super force. This super force cannot exist still in our universe today. It has to basically be like you put some key in it, you turn the key, and this thing shattered into a bunch of different pieces, and miraculously these four shards that remain describe our universe today. So if you want to say, oh, I don't just have the four forces, I have this one fundamental force in the theory of everything, what you want from a theoretical point of view is you want to know what key gets inserted into the theory of everything, and when it turns, why does your theory break into our actual universe and not into any of the other possible ways this thing could have broken apart? That's a problem for string theory. That's a problem for most models of grand unified theories. And it's definitely a problem for Wolfram's theory and for Weinstein's theory. So for those theories, it's a big challenge to even figure out from this unified theory that I made, can I even get these four forces and our universe back out of it? In most cases, no, you can't, right? Eric Berlinde has a theory of, oh, well, gravity is emergent and it comes from entropy. And you say, oh, that's interesting. And you look at his papers and you say, well, wait a minute. When I look at your thing, you make a prediction for dark matter that says the dark matter to normal matter ratio should change over time. That's not consistent with the universe we observe. So I would say there are three challenges for any new theory. And I talked about these already in the context of cosmic inflation versus the original hot Big Bang, which is, number one, you have to already reproduce the established successes of your old theory. So if you have a theory of everything, you had better make sure that it can reproduce all the successes of, I'll say, general relativity for gravity and the standard model for the other three forces. Number two, there's a reason you're coming up with the theory of everything, right? Presumably, you're motivated by coming up with this theory of everything because you want to explain something that the current theory doesn't explain. You have to do that too. You have to reproduce the old theory's successes, and you need to explain the thing that your old theory couldn't explain, which was your reason for coming up with your new theory in the first place. And then, and this is the hard part now. So those are supposedly the easy parts. And no, neither Wolfram's theory, which I've read. I have a new kind of science on my shelf. A friend of mine, thanks Ben, got it for me when I was in grad school, and I've read it. Um, Not clear that it meets either number one or number two. Same with Weinstein's theory. Then you come to number three, which is okay, let's stack them against each other. What does the non unified theory predict versus what does your unified theory predict for something in our universe that we can go out and measure? And so, what's that going to be? Well, if you're having a particle physics thing, the things you measure are scattering amplitudes and cross sections and decay products and branching ratios, right? Those are the things you go and measure in particle physics. In cosmology, you can measure things like what's the clustering distribution of galaxies? How does the universe expand all throughout its cosmic history? How do supermassive black holes and galaxies form and merge and grow up? What does the cosmic web look like in gory detail, right? These are measurable properties. So that's what the big challenge is. If you have a new theory, great. We come up with these all the time. The question is, how do you connect your theory to the actual observable, at least observable in principle universe? And how do you get out the successes we've already had? And what problem are you solving that you haven't solved before? And what are some things you can go out and measure that will be different from what the standard theory predicts? So if you can get a bunch of people who know enough about these theories and care enough about these theories and also know enough about what you can go out and observe and measure in the universe to make those connections, yeah, maybe you could get something interesting. I'm not betting on it, but that's, but you can try. You can try if you think it's interesting. I think there are interesting avenues to explore there. If you ask me what the extensions to the standard model that I think are most interesting to pursue, you would get a very different list of ideas from me than you would from Brian Keating. I think asymptotic safety and asymptotically safe gravity are much more interesting alternatives to what we typically think of as Wolfram's theory or Weinstein's theory. I think that when you're talking about dark matter, there are tests of dark matter versus modified gravity that point the way towards dark matter and away from modified gravity, that if your theory doesn't incorporate dark matter, I think it's at a very big disadvantage. So there are a lot of avenues to pursue. And I don't want to discourage anyone from pursuing any avenue that you're interested in, because look, most ideas that are out there are bad ideas. And most of the good ideas that are out there are still going to be wrong and not describe our actual universe. So if you think you've had an idea where you can take what we previously thought of as a bad idea and turn it into a good idea, or if you can take what some people think is a good idea and turn it into a testable idea, I don't want to discourage you from working on it. Go for it. That's how progress gets made sometimes. And so go for it, and people are going to wonder at you like, well, aren't you worried that you're wasting your life? And my response to that is always, look, we always only get one life each, and we can spend it or squander it however we like. If we think the time and the effort we're spending is worthwhile, that's enough. That makes it worthwhile. So if you think Wolfram's idea or Weinstein's idea or Keating's ideas or anyone else's ideas are worth pursuing, feel free to pursue them yourself, because you might be the one who makes that key breakthrough that converts me from a skeptic to a believer, or converts this from a purely theoretically speculative idea to something that we can all of a sudden go out and test.
Thank you for that, Ethan. I think it's very refreshing to hear encouraging words when it comes to pursuing theories of everything, because I guess that's more on the rare side. Most professional scientists, for understandable reasons, don't want to be bothered with theories of everything coming from say random places. They're obviously very busy with their own program or skeptical by nature. So yeah, thank you for that insight. Although let
Well,
me
yeah,
maybe
just
yeah.
because you don't want to do a thing doesn't mean it isn't valuable for someone to
Oh,
do that thing.
certainly.
I don't want to be an electrician, but I'm thankful electricians exist. I don't want to be an auto mechanic, but I'm thankful auto mechanics exist. And I don't want to be a condensed matter theorist, but I'm thankful that condensed matter theory exists. So, maybe you don't want to be someone who works on or thinks about grand unification or string theory or quantum gravity or theories of everything, but some people do. And just because you're not one of them doesn't mean that that pursuit isn't worthwhile to the people pursuing it.
Indeed, indeed. But the point that I wanted to get at actually is more about, I think, as I'll get to in a second, about kind of the way of doing science properly. So let me get back to this sort of controversy and how theories of everything tie in with this losing the Nobel Prize story. So as you've already explained, or as we've discussed, the losing the Nobel Prize story is a story about how Brian Keating and his collaborators had to retract the results after their experiments were, shown to be invalid upon further analyses. In this case, by the Planck team, looking at the data that they had. And so, sort of one of the lessons coming out of losing the Nobel Prize is that when you're asserting bold scientific claims, certainly Nobel Prize worthy, then you should be doing your due diligence to finalize those claims, taking into account as much evidence as possible. At least I think that's one lesson to be learned from that story if you want to avoid a PR fiasco. And so I would think that, say, if Brian Keating incorporated that lesson, then in the case of his investigations into, say, geometric unity, then it would make sense to incorporate as much feedback as possible. Really, anybody going into a study of a theory of everything or testing it should take into account as much available evidence as possible. And in the case of geometric unity, it turns out that the only meaningful source of feedback that Brian and Eric has received is a paper that I wrote titled A Response to Geometric Unity, along with my co-author, Theo Polya. And well, the only response that Brian and Eric have given in this matter is that they need to know who Theo Polya is. They've dismissed the work because they don't know the identity of my co-author. There's this famous Clubhouse recording, which was recorded and made public, in which Brian and Eric are persistent that they need to know who Theo Polya is. And, several of our colleagues, who don't need to name any names, have reached out to myself and Brian trying to get us to talk together about geometric unity. And while each time Brian has declined for reasons I don't quite know, he hasn't surfaced them to me directly, nor did he mention anything about those concerns on Lex Fridman's podcast. It turns out that Lex Fridman had discussed with myself and Theo Polya geometric unity shortly after it came out. But in any case, I brought this up because I wanted your feedback on this matter, Ethan. It's unfortunate that Brian hasn't really responded to our work, but you as a scientist and as a science communicator, as someone who explains how science is and ought to be done, I wanted to get your thoughts on whether you think there are any circumstances in which a scientist should ignore or dismiss scientific feedback or evidence, in particular, if any of those feedbacks concern or are coming from authors, one of whom is pseudonymous.
Okay, well, okay, there are a few points here, and I would say that from my point of view, because I'm not involved in this, and I'm not impressed with this theory. Like I took a glance at it, and I was like, all right, well, someone's working on that, and then I stopped glancing at it, and that was the end of my curiosity about it. But when we approach things scientifically, we don't look to each other for validation about whether the idea is correct. We look to the universe itself, right? That's, from a theoretical point of view, you asked, is this theory self-consistent or is it self-contradictory? If it's self-contradictory, you have a problem. If it's self-consistent, you have less of a problem. We look at, is your theory something that can make concrete predictions about observable reality, and do those predictions match up with the reality that you go out and measure? And those are things we care about. But beyond that, you look at, what is your theory's predictive power? right? You say, what can it predict? What can we, for example, if I tell you, well, one of the reasons I think asymptotically safe gravity is very interesting is in 2012, I believe. No, sorry, it was a few years before the Higgs boson result was announced. And this paper had made a prediction and said, if we take blah, 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 and do this work, then we predict that the mass of the Higgs boson should be 125 GeV plus or minus 1 GeV. And when they found the Higgs boson, it's between 125 and 126 GeV. And when that came out, I was like, oh, wow, this interesting thing that I read suddenly got a lot more interesting because something that we didn't know that it made a prediction for actually came true. Well, that's kind of remarkable. So that was why I thought that theory is more interesting. As but that could have come from anyone, right? The point is, it was a paper that took an idea, developed the idea, made a concrete prediction without making any mistakes, and then that prediction matched up with an experimental value, whereas no one else knew how to predict it. So that's why I thought that was interesting. But it wouldn't have mattered, right? If you had said, well, who's Christoph Wederich? Who's Mikhail Shaposhnikov? Like, who cares who those people are? What matters is the content of what is in that paper. Now, it is true that a lot of times, and I've seen this because people send them to me unsolicited, a lot of times people write manuscripts who are not involved in the scientific field. And very quickly you can tell, oh, you have some misconceptions because you don't know all the things that one learns on the path to becoming a bona fide scientist. But there are plenty of things written by people who are new scientists, are old scientists who want to remain anonymous or pseudonymous for whatever reason, where what's put out is completely legitimate and totally robust and could have come from a professional at any level. And those things, you really don't want to dismiss just because you don't know who the source is. So if that's the only reason you have for not wanting to address something, in my estimation, that's not a very good reason to do it. Now, if you don't want to address what they're saying because you have good reasons, like you're saying, oh, these points that they bring up may or may not be true, but they're not at all relevant to what I'm talking about, then that's a different story. But without knowing finer details, I would say, listen, when you put something out there for the community to consider, if you're getting feedback from the community that tells you what you think you're doing is not what you're doing, you ignore that feedback at your own peril, because it's very easy to claim I'm being oppressed when nobody cares about what you're doing. It's very easy to claim no one's taking my work seriously when people have good reasons not to take your work seriously. So without knowing more about it, I would say, listen, it's possible that the approach that you and your pseudonymous co-author are taking is absolutely correct, and this idea is flawed. And it's also possible, I can imagine, that what you put forth is flawed and this idea is in fact correct and robust and isn't undermined by what you put out there. But I'd have to take a look at the specific claims for that. And to be frank, like I don't want to, but if I was the author, I would want to, because this is exactly the feedback that I would be hoping for. And, I think one of the big things that frustrates me, it frustrated me as a researcher, and it continues to frustrate me as a science communicator, is people who put out wild theories who don't then do the hard work of trying to knock their own theory down, of trying to say, hey, let's throw the strongest challenges we can at this new idea. And instead, they ignore the evidence that contradicts it, and they emphasize the pieces of evidence that support it. And so you play this cherry picking Fox News-ish game of, oh, well, let's look at the things that make it look good and let's minimize the things that make it look bad. When you hear people talk about modified gravity, you almost always hear them talk about things happening on the scale of a single galaxy or a galaxy and its immediate environs outside of it. You never hear them talking about, let's look at clusters of galaxies because the modification that works for individual galaxies fails on scales of clusters of galaxies. You never hear them talking about, hey, let's look at cosmic scales and how galaxies cluster together across the cosmic web, or let's look at the imperfections in the cosmic microwave background, because those pieces of evidence, yet again, cannot be reconciled with either the cluster scale or the galaxy scale modifications you'd make to gravity. So now you've suddenly said, oh, well, I can modify gravity the way I like on these galactic scales. But then to account for the cosmic scales, I need to introduce something that's identical to dark matter. And then, they don't want to talk about this part. And I don't want them to talk about this part because we all know this part. I just want them to admit it and stop pretending it's not real. Same thing with Roger Penrose, right? Roger Penrose has this theory that's an alternative to inflation that he calls the conformal cyclic cosmology. And he actually makes a prediction in that theory that differs from inflation's predictions. What he specifically predicts is there will be these matched up concentric circles that appear in the cosmic microwave background. And in a typical universe like we live in, you should find about 20,000 of these features in the cosmic microwave background. Well, we've gone and looked for these features, and we found that, hey, maybe these features exist in numbers up to about 10 to 20 of them. That's not 20,000 of them. That's way off. So that should falsify that theory right there. This has been explained to Penrose hundreds of times independently from different scientists. And Penrose goes on TV or makes videos and talks about this like this is just as important as his work from the 60s on black holes. My personal opinion is that the day after Roger Penrose dies, no one will ever bring up the CCC ever again. But, people are going to do what they do because they almost like become married to their ideas. They fall in love with their own ideas. And I'd love to contrast what that sort of disingenuous thinking is with someone like Johannes Kepler, right? Because Kepler, we know him now for his laws of planetary motion, for his laws that, planets move in ellipses around the sun with the sun at one focus. Planets sweep out equal areas in equal times. They move closer when they're at perihelion and slower at aphelion. And the amount of area that they sweep out is equivalent, no matter whether you're looking at a big fat pizza slice of the orbit or a long, thin, narrow pizza slice of the orbit. And the third law says, oh, if I compare any two objects in orbit, that the ratio of their semi-major axes cubed is going to be proportional to the period of their orbits squared. Kepler's three laws, right? Super famous for him, well-deserved. And as it turned out that we discovered much later that century, all three of them can be derived from Newton's law of gravity, which wasn't known when Kepler made these laws. But guess what? That wasn't Kepler's original idea. Kepler's original idea was that you could take, hey, we have 6 planets if you assume heliocentrism: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. We didn't know about the others. So 6. And he said, well, guess what? Mathematically, there are only 5 solids that you can make that are made out of identical polygons. You can make a 12-sided three-dimensional polygon out of pentagons, out of regular pentagons. You can make a cube, which is a 6-sided polygon made out of squares. And there are 3 different ways to put triangles together to make an identical structure. You can make a 4-sided one called a tetrahedron. You can make a you can make a 8-sided one called an octahedron, and you can make a 20-sided one called a dodecahedron. And anyone who's
Or
ever
icosahedron.
played Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons will be
Yeah.
familiar with the shapes of these these dice. But so Kepler said, oh, well, look, if I have 5 different solids, then I can either inscribe a sphere inside it or I can circumscribe a sphere around it. And if I build this system of nested spheres, there's a total of 6 spheres that these planets can orbit around. And that was his idea. He put that forth in the late 1500s. He called it the Mysterium Cosmographicum, or the cosmic mystery. And he is the one who gave us the terms of like the music of the spheres. And we got all of this like great stuff. And Kepler, one of the reasons that I look up to him so much is when the data came in and he had access to all of Tycho Brahe's world-class cutting-edge data, especially the orbit of Mars, it didn't match. In fact, it still matched Ptolemy's old geocentric model with epicycles better than it matched his thing of the spheres. And that's what I think made Kepler brilliant to me, is even though Kepler kept writing about these spheres and these polygons and kept giving talks about it and receiving money for it, you know, he also continued to do work where he said, but looking at the evidence, I'm not going to think about this. Instead, I'm going to come up with these new laws that accurately describe what I'm observing. And instead of saying, I have this idea of how things ought to be and deriving things from that, he took this opposite approach of saying, I'm going to look at the data and what it indicates, and I'm going to build my model of the universe to comport with the reality we actually observe. And that is how we got Kepler's laws of planetary motion. And I think that every scientist out there who's ever said, well, I know it is my heart, this is the way it has to be, right? From Roger Penrose to Fred Hoyle to Paul Steinhardt to Stacy McGaw or Pavel Krupa or anyone else, like, well, the rest of us, and it still is the rest of us, we're going to look at the evidence and we're going to go with what the evidence indicates. And until you can explain the full suite of evidence, until you can meet those 3 criteria we talked about, reproduce the successes of the old theory, explain the thing that you were mad the old theory couldn't explain in the first place, and make new predictions where your theory versus the old theory are mapped out, that you can go out and measure them and see who's right. Until you do those 3 things, no one's going to believe you. No one scrupulous is going to believe you.
Wow. Yeah, indeed, Kepler is the ultimate stress tester of his own ideas, it seems. Anyways, maybe let's just wrap this up on a positive note, because we've talked a lot about maybe some of the flaws of Brian's book, or maybe the way he's maybe avoided criticism in a way that a scientist shouldn't have. But yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, I think you probably have a particular reason to want to explore that more, because I know for myself, when I actually go and put my efforts into saying, let's look at this under the microscope, let's get into the details and see, does this hold up, or are there real flaws in this? I often can find real flaws in something, and I hope that if I ever go to the author of that paper or say, hey, I think I found a flaw here that you might want to consider. If I'm doing this, scrupulously, honestly, and constructively, I would hope to be met with a constructive attitude as well. And if you feel like, hey, I did the hard work of doing this to be constructive, and when I brought it to you, you just brushed me off and were like, no, it's easier if I pretend that this doesn't exist. Like, I understand why you would feel sort of personally like, what are you doing to me? Like, you asked for this thing, I went and put the effort into giving you this thing, and now you're pretending like this doesn't count.
Indeed, and the funny thing is, of course, Brian and Eric went on their podcast to promote their work and asked the scientific community for feedback. And the irony is that when they got it, they ignored it. Let me read a quote. What I did say, I wanted to end on a positive note. So I think there's a relevant quote that I think exemplifies the need to respond to feedback, and it comes right from Brian Keating's book. He writes, Bicep 2 showed the public how science works. You release a result, and other scientists work to test the result. You put your cards on the table and leave it all out there for your critics. If and when they attack, you defend until you can defend no longer and the attack subside. Only then, when both critic and supporter collapse, exhausted, can science be said to be settled.
That's also pretty generous to the Bicep 2 collaboration interpretation of what happened, because as you correctly stated earlier, their results were refuted by the data from the Planck collaboration. But in order to know that, the Planck data needed to be released. And in order for Bicep 2 to estimate the dust they were seeing, the foreground contamination of the signal they were trying to measure, they needed the Planck data. But they were worried that if Planck releases their stuff first, then no one will care about Bicep 2, because if these things exist, Planck will find them and scoop us. So what they did was they went to Planck pre-release talks, took pictures of slides, and attempted to use those slides to reconstruct the information that Planck had released. And when they did that, using that very dubiously ethical method, they got the wrong result. And, I think what Brian says is correct in theory, but I think that what he says in practice does not apply to what Bicep 2 as a collaboration actually did. And me and everyone else hopes that they got enough egg on their face from that they won't pull a stunt like that again.